XXXTentacion.
Artist whose real name is Jose Onfroy
Has been shot.
He was a kid. He was exciting. He was polarizing. I knew people wouldn't forget him.
Yeah.
The inception of the film actually started before I came on board, but from the time I began researching to Final Cut, it was about 2 years. The camera we used was the Alexa Mini. We had about usually 10 or so people with us on most shoots. I'd say about 15 that I conducted. I would not be able to tell you how many hours. It just seemed countless, and it was all broken down into like these, bite-sized chunks, social media-sized chunks. So we had like 3 different spreadsheets with hundreds of rows and categories and designations. And I have to say that it was such a team effort. I had an incredible team of archivists in addition to my editor.
Hey, yeah. There's definitely a difference between Jose Onfroy and XXXTentacion. Jose Onfroy was weak. Nobody cared about Jose Onfroy until he took on the persona as XXX.
I remember seeing Whose Streets, your film, earlier, and I'm very curious what sort of led you to look at me as a project following that up, and sort of what attracted you to the story? How did you first become involved? If you could just sort of walk us through that.
So my strategy as a director, I think, is a little different than some, because I feel like there's always this expectation that a director is just like, brainchilding these ideas from within, and then I'm going to go put it out into the world. And my approach is really to try to be as open as possible about my interests, my specialties, my skills, and sort of look for opportunities to collaborate or to step into a situation where I feel like I can be particularly of service. So when I went into it, I was kind of prepared to scare them off because I knew how controversial XXXTentacion was. And so I was like, listen, I'm an activist. I believe survivors by default. If I was to do a project like this, we would have to tell the truth about everything that happened. It would have to be the good, the bad, and the ugly. And my expectation was that, they would probably be like, okay, that's very intense. Let's find someone who's, more amenable. But what ultimately ended up happening was, after the initial interview with the Fader production company, I met Cleo, his mom. I went to her house in Florida and we sat down, and the initial conversation was kind of formal and I was sort of pitching. And then I just had this moment where I was like, I need to level with this person, this mother that's grieving. And the reason I'm really here and even pushing past my hesitation is because there's something to this artist that is really about mental health and about sort of self-recovery, which is something that I'm so interested in. And so I just kind of opened up and I was like, I'm here because I feel called to be here. I think that your son was trying to help others and he needed help that he wasn't getting. From that kind of authenticity, we ended up having a really long conversation, and we talked about spirituality, and we talked about grief, and we talked about, her relationship to this story. And that's how we both sort of realized that, okay, these are people that I'll be able to navigate these difficult waters with.
Darkness sells. He was getting more famous by the day.
The thing about his fame started with this horrific alleged crime.
As your kind of rapport with her was developing, was there ever any moment that you were reticent to go forward with it, or you were unsure if you could really kind of find the balance of how to tell this story?
Oh yeah, I would say probably a single day of the production. I think we were both scared. I was afraid that attaching my name and my reputation to someone who had these allegations against them, that I wouldn't be able to recover. She was afraid that bringing a feminist and activist in to tell her son's story, that he was going to be further demonized. And so we both had a lot on the line in terms of finding this balance. But I think it was just that authenticity again, and that genuine connection, that genuine commitment to strive together through this. That was the only way we were going to get through. And I think that there were tons of moments. I mean, anyone who's making documentary knows that there are moments where you're deep in it and you're like, do I have a film? Have I done the right thing? Is this going to work? And that was absolutely the case with this project.
It was kind of like a fairy tale, but a really grim one. There was a lot of jealousy.
I could hear them fighting. Somebody was getting hit.
Jesse was like, no, Mom, it's not true. And a part of me took that and ran with it.
I mean, what surprised you the most personally about just exploring this man's life?
It's how irreconcilable the aspects of his personality are. You know, it was unanimous from the people that I spoke to that he was kind, that he was respectful, that he had a humility about him, that he was generous, that he was constantly putting others before himself, and that he was also violent and very angry and, you know, had this uncontrollable aspect to him. And instinctively, I feel like we have this idea that a bad person is just like always a bad person and they walk around with a grimace on their face and an evil laugh and they just only do bad things. So to find out that this was a person that had such a tremendous positive impact on the people around him and that left people around him feeling so much love and empathy for him, and those very same people are able to acknowledge his harm and his violence, I sort of expected to maybe get to the root of him being one thing or another. And ultimately, at the core of it, there's only more and more complexity.
I apologize. I haven't been getting the help I really want.
I think he was changing, but he hurt others and himself.
You have a trove of footage to work from with this film, because this is a generation of people who are recording themselves and broadcasting themselves to a astonishing degree. But sort of how did you kind of reckon with what to put in, what to leave out, what is tasteful, what is not?
Again, this was a super collaborative effort, and my editor was editing while I was shooting. So I really have to commend and express my gratitude for Chris McNabb, who really made a lot of those decisions based off of what the story needed to be. And Chris has such an impeccable sense of timing and rhythm and movement and taste. So Chris laid the scaffolding of a lot of those scenes based on the intentionality. And then after I finally finished shooting and got time to focus solely in on the edit, that's when I went in and was like, you know, we need this, we need that. One of the things that I would say that I felt like I had more of a direct control over and the ability to sort of dictate was how we were using his post that he created where he was speaking directly to the audience. I knew that I wanted to have his voice be present. I wanted to tell the story that as closely as I could assess that he would have told if he were, you know, in his sort of highest self. And so it was important to have him narrating along. And the other thing I'll say, just going back to the beginning of your question about this, that him documenting a lot of this crazy stuff himself, you know, I think one of the things that we don't realize, maybe we forget, or maybe we came from different types of environments. For young people, fighting is fun. It's honest fun for them. And I think that that's something that got lost because his stature grew so big and his influence, and then he was being talked about by, you know, grown adults who maybe just don't have any context for that. Some of it got even more heightened. And so it was challenging to figure out how much of that to use. You know, the moment where he's beating someone up in a bathroom and it's like sort of this half staged, half planned thing, but you feel like he's also losing control. You know, it was like, how much of this can people take without turning this off? And am I presenting this as something that people should be deeply concerned with? Or am I presenting this as something that was entertaining at the time? I can't say that I had like a strict rubric from the outset. It was all feeling our way through it, sharing it with people that we trusted, watching it over and over, and just, you know, the art of finding that in the edit.
We was born into a world that taught us that men have to fight. But your weapon can be the same thing that kills you. There's some issues where people just need to be put away, but there's some issues where people need help, especially kids.
On the surface, the subject matter of, you know, your first film, Whose Streets, and this film could not be more different. I'm curious if you see any kind of through lines between them or similar things that attract you as a filmmaker between these two subjects.
Yeah, there are a few. I think, first of all, it's just the scope of the impact. I think both the Black Lives Matter movement and XXXTentacion are these massive digital phenomena that reached worldwide. I think BLM is more readily recognizable to the mainstream, but because XXXTentacion was sort of canceled in the mainstream, we don't really fully, I think as a media sphere, recognize the fact that he actually did penetrate really, really deep within his base and across a wide geography. And I feel like the function of story in society is to teach us how to be better with each other. And for that reason, I feel compelled to speak to what the collective is processing. And the other part of it is I think that although I want to be careful to note that violence is not specific to people of color by any means, we are in a specific situation here in the United States where after centuries of colonialism, we often have these patterns of violence that are embedded in our families and have become normalized. And we're trying to figure out ways to work through them and work out of them. And so, I am preoccupied with how are Black people surviving, how are Black people recovering on a historical scale. And I think both of these films in a certain way do touch on that.
He realized he had an obligation that was bigger than himself.
To do what he's done in 2 years, whether you loved it or whether you hated it, you just had to acknowledge it.
Someone that's afraid to let go.